What's up, the Degenerate Nation? Welcome back to the new BCS as part of the Big Bets on Campus podcast. I'm Stuckey. Joining me, as always, the other two members of the new BCS, of course, Brett McMurphy and Collin Wilson. We are on the heels of one of the most important days in, I think, this country's history, with Maction getting underway on Tuesday night, and more importantly, the end of CUSA weekday action. We also will have the first release of the college football playoff rankings, which we'll talk about in just a moment. I think there's something else going on too, but I'm not sure. But Maction is back, baby. My Maction mid-season Mac manifesto, I think I got it down to like 8,000 words. I have one team left to do, and then it'll be out in the morning. Central Michigan. Who is that team? I don't know. So I held them for last. We'll talk about their game in just a moment. Just a heads up, if you missed it this past week, we stopped doing a live 3 and Out show on YouTube because we wanted to change the format a bit. We got some feedback that we wanted to talk about the games we were most passionate about instead of holding them for the 3 and Out, like favorite underdog. We could just touch on them briefly and then talk about them earlier on in the show. And we wanted to release the podcast earlier. Again, feedback from you guys. So now the entire betting preview will be out Thursday evening instead of 3:30 in the morning on Friday. Should be out by 8 Eastern every Thursday moving forward. Also, at the end of today's show, we'll hear a snippet from Collin's weekly interview with Johnny Manziel. It's part of our YouTube series, Johnny's Intangibles. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe and like button. And once again, friend of the show, loyal listener Connor, submitted a new ridiculous song parody. This time it's about Hugh Freeze. Oh, Hugh. So we'll play that at the end of the show. As we always do, this is just a high-level, general show. Do some trivia, too. Kind of talk about some high-level topics. In the future, now, once we do get the college football playoff rankings, we can talk more futures and break those down and where we stand, which should be interesting after a number of upsets of teams that were right in the thick of that conversation. And I'm sure there's going to be a lot more movement and many more upsets throughout the rest of the season. I mean, that's my biggest takeaway. There's just nobody that's really elite. And I think that we're just going to continue to see more chaos. Just when you think a team is really good, prime for a run, maybe against weaker competition, might not be the case. Saw that with Iowa State. We saw that with Kansas State. We saw that with Clemson. I mean, how dominant did Clemson look in between Georgia and Louisville? Problem was, they didn't really play anybody. And we kind of saw their true colors. But I just think this is the new era of college football, and it marries perfectly with the expanded playoff. So I personally love it. Collin, I'll go to you. What's your biggest takeaway from Week 10? Is it maybe, I know, again, that you watch closely. Is it maybe that Ole Miss is potentially back, and or you want to go somewhere else?
Well, Jordan Watkins, Jordan Watkins went crazy for Ole Miss. I think my biggest takeaway is that anybody besides the G5 team that gets into the playoff can win the national title. And I didn't used to think that before. I thought team like Georgia or Texas would win their conference, get an automatic bye. I don't think that's the case anymore. If you look at all of these teams that are ranked in the AP top 25, specifically the top 10, who should be big players in the college football playoff rankings, they've all got major holes, right? Oregon can be ran on all day. If they faced Vandy or Service Academy, it'd be fun to watch. Georgia, are they motivated? What the hell is going on with Carson Beck? Miami, you don't want to play a defensive-minded Havoc team in the playoff whatsoever. Ohio State needs to be healthy.
Miami's defense has issues too.
Miami's defense has issues. Texas has issues in the trench from a physicality standpoint. Penn State can't score a touchdown with Andy Kotelnicki, an offensive coordinator. And Tennessee has a quarterback that will just go to the turf if there's even a threat of a sack. I mean, I think my takeaway is any team except whoever wins the G5 spot can win the national title. It's going to be just like March Madness with basketball. It's about the matchups once we get that bracket.
Yeah, Ole Miss is definitely intriguing to me. Like I thought they might check out. Um, where was Lane at mentally? Where was that team at? They've had some injuries, but if that offensive performance was pretty incredible against Arkansas. It's not a horrendous Arkansas defense. We saw them scuffle a bit against Oklahoma the week before, but in reality, they went. This is a team that went into South Carolina and dominated the Gamecocks. This is a team that should have beat LSU, and their season is probably going to come down to this week at home against a Georgia team that we've seen be very inconsistent. The one
I think they're going to win.
The Ole Miss defense. I mean, the Ole Miss defense has been very good all year.
I was going to say, Stuck. So first off, with the OU game, Ole Miss was missing Trey Harris, which accounted for like 40% of their offense. Like Jackson Dart only looked at Trey Harris. So I understand that non-cover. What they did to Arkansas without Trey Harris is even more impressive to me. But I think they've got a real chance to beat Georgia this week. And if Georgia doesn't bring the same intensity that they had against Texas, then I think Lane Kiffin is in the driver's seat to be in the playoff.
Yeah. And, Arkansas, if you look at the numbers, they put up close to 500 yards. But, I mean, there was like three or four 75, 80-yard touchdown drives in the second half when they were down, 32 points?
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of meaningless yards in that game. But we'll break down Ole Miss and Georgia later this week. Also, something worth keeping an eye on is, and I'll go through all the quarterback injuries again on the main show, DJ Lagway. I can't see him playing this week, but Napier didn't rule it out. And Florida's been playing much better.
Mm-hmm.
And they're going to have a say in the college football playoff. They had a shot to beat Georgia if Lagway doesn't go down. They will now play Texas. They then play Ole Miss. I believe they host Ole Miss.
Mm-hmm.
They play every top team in the country. So if Florida gets Lagway back, and they also had, they were without their top receiver, their top back, their top three defensive backs in that game. But yeah, they host LSU, and we know LSU Alabama is basically an elimination game this weekend. So if Florida's healthy against LSU, against Ole Miss at home to close out the year, they could certainly take someone out of the running. So keep an eye on the Gators, who will play 3 top 15 teams to close out the season. Brett, what was your biggest takeaway from Week 10?
Kind of a combination of what you guys mentioned. I'm excited to see what happens with the college football playoff rankings on Tuesday. And I think it's, we've kind of touched on this, but really there's not a dominant team. And you look at the so-called top 10 teams, 4 of the top 10 teams have 0 wins against current top 20 teams. And that's obviously Penn State, Indiana. Miami doesn't have a top 20 win. And Texas. Texas's best win is Vanderbilt, and they're in at 25 or whatever. So, that's I'm going to be fascinated to see how the selection committee ranks these teams. I think Indiana could be up at 5 because Oregon's got, top 25 win. Ohio State does. Georgia does. Indiana's boat racing everybody. I think the committee will reward them for that. Not the problem, but the issue with that is if you stick them up that high and then they lose a close one to Ohio State and then they win out, are you going to keep shuffling them down because they don't play anybody? I don't know. One thing, little, nugget for our listeners, you mentioned Florida. Florida's getting more than 3 touchdowns against Texas. Mississippi State getting more than 3 touchdowns against Tennessee. Why is that important? Well, SEC double-digit underdogs in conference play are a ridiculous 15-2 against the spread. So, if you like that trend, I would take the big dog and hold your nose. But I don't think there's any dominant team. And it's funny, we'll get down to it, and I think somebody like Penn State, somebody like Indiana that will have no top 25 wins will be in this 12-team playoff.
Yeah, I mean, I would assume what it's going to look like is you're going to have, but obviously Miami is your ACC rep, conference champion projected. Georgia probably, Oregon, BYU as your top four. And then you're probably going to have SMU in there, Indiana in there, Boise State as the G5 team, Texas, Ohio State, Penn State, Notre Dame. The last spot, maybe Tennessee.
Tennessee, yeah, I think Tennessee's in there if they don't get blown out by Georgia. If they go 10-2, and I also think Boise. If I look,
BYU's been. They got to go to Vandy the last game of the year.
BYU's been incredible, but if they lose a game, Boise State may get the fourth highest conference seed and get that first round bye, which would be crazy.
Agreed. Yeah, that's definitely in play and something worth monitoring. So yeah, I'll be excited to see what it comes out. But ultimately, I think it's important for like some positioning, like where these teams start. But there's a lot of football left. There's going to be more upsets. There's going to be more movement. I mean, going into this past weekend, it would have been Clemson, Iowa State. They're both out now. Now they're not completely out of it, but they're going to need some help, and they're going to need some other upsets. You also had Texas A&M probably out right now, but I think if they win out, they're in. And it would be a really interesting conversation between Texas A&M and Tennessee. I think I'm taking Texas A&M if they both finish 10-2, because Texas A&M would have, I think, a better resume. Right, one of their losses was to Notre Dame, who we presume will be in. Tennessee's loss was to Arkansas, worse loss than what Texas A&M has. And I don't think at South Carolina is a bad loss. And then you throw in the fact that they would have wins over LSU. And then the big one to end the year, which I think matters some, just like it's the most recent data point. So hope, Vandy's much better this year, but Texas A&M beating Texas will hold more weight than Tennessee beating Vandy at the end of the year. Colin, I see you nodding your head. Would you agree with that? 10-2 Texas A&M over 10-2 Tennessee?
Yeah, 100%. And I would take a two-loss Texas A&M team over SMU if they were one loss too. I mean, you finally got me to say that. But no, I have a Tennessee to not make the playoff bet. You have a Texas A&M.
That's why you're agreeing. That's why we're.
Well, I also agree. Just from how you look against Texas A&M schedule is the toughest in the nation by far. I mean, it's insane who they've had to play. So
I evaluate my college football playoff projections purely based on the bets that I need to win.
That's South Carolina. That was such a trap, though. It's not. I mean, they were fired up. Was that a scene? Was that a scene or what from South Carolina? That was. They had the perfect type of defense to stop Texas A&M's offense. I just think it was a real unlucky scheduling spot to get them right after.
Yeah, they were coming off a bye. Texas A&M off of a huge win. They didn't have the element of surprise. Be interested to see Texas A&M what the offense does the rest of the way. They do have to get by. They have to win at Auburn. I mean, Auburn will probably find a way to blow it, but Auburn's a good team. They just don't get results.
In your scenario, Texas A&M could knock Texas out of the playoff. Because if that happens, Texas has no wins against top 25 teams.
Mm-hmm.
Now, who they beat? Vanderbilt. Should that be in? I mean, again, if we start the rankings now and don't go with preseason rankings, Texas would not be in that with as a two-loss team with no top 25 wins.
So Texas A&M. Now Texas could still get in. Like you could have other chaos, right? Like that's also what we have to consider, right? Like we have, like Notre Dame. I think 10-2 Notre Dame is out. So, if Notre Dame has gone from out after losing to NIU to squarely in, but I think if they lose to Army or USC, I don't think their resume holds up. Would you agree with that, Brett?
Yes and no, because I'm like saying, okay, Texas loses to A&M, Texas is out, and you're saying Notre Dame's 2 losses, they're out. I agree with that a little bit, but then you look at the entire body of the top 15, 20 teams, we still got to find 11 teams to get in the playoff. And I think there's going to be a lot of 2-loss teams that get in. I mean, we'll have
I know.
4.
I'm saying I agree with you. I'm saying I would take Texas, a 10-2 Texas, over a 10-2 Notre Dame.
Why? Notre Dame beat A&M and A&M beat Texas. I mean, if you want to go head to head.
Also, Texas's losses would be A&M and Georgia, and Texas. Both of those teams would be in the college football playoff. Notre Dame's losses would be to USC or Army and
NIU,
Northern Illinois. That's
so. You're right. So what we don't know, because it's a beauty pageant, does the committee value wins, or does the committee value who you lose to? And if they value who you lose to, then Collin has no chance of only 2 SEC teams getting it.
Well, I think this ranking is going to be really important, and the teams you need to keep your eye on. By the way, as we pivot off this subject, Texas A&M 3-1 to make the playoff. Texas minus 1,600. And there's not a no listed. I would like to see a no listed.
Jesus.
I think the team that you really need to pay attention to, if you go to the AP top 25, you've got Boise State with 1 loss at 12. You don't need to pay attention to them in the ranking. They'll be in that spot. SMU is 13th. They jumped 7 spots in the poll. They're 8-1, and they're ahead of 6-2 LSU, 7-2 Texas A&M, 7-2 Ole Miss. So the AP poll, which I know is a ton of ballots all squashed together, what is the college football playoff committee, the selection committee? How do they view SMU's 1 loss versus LSU, Texas A&M, Ole Miss's 2 losses? Because once you set that precedence, you've seen committee in years past, Brett, where they have flip-flopped on, and they've just all of a sudden, eye test, they'll throw out some numbers that people don't understand. I think the first ranking, SMU in relevance to 2-loss SEC teams, is extremely important.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, I agree. I think because SMU does not have, Pitt, Pitt may or may not be in the top 25 of the selection committee. I guess they'll probably be in the bottom 5. But I'm just thinking, playing this out, if SMU loses to Miami, they don't have a top 25 win. And so but then again, all the teams you named, LSU, Ole Miss, Texas A&M, all those guys can also lose and not even go to their conference championship game. And that's the biggest thing. Again, it's broken record. How's the committee going to value the teams that made it to the conference championship game and lost? Are they going to hold that extra loss against them, or is it basically a free roll and they're not going to hold it against them and give them credit for getting to the championship game? That we won't know. And look, Reese Davis will ask whoever the committee chair is. I forgot. I think it's Ward Manuel at Michigan this year. Tuesday night, that'll be one of the questions. How are you guys going to evaluate conference championship losers? And he's going to say something in generalities. They'll ask him every week. We can get on the press conferences after the Tuesday calls. We can ask him every week. They are not going to answer that question because they don't know. And again, some people may value it, some people may not, but I think that will have the biggest impact on who gets in or who doesn't get in when you're comparing teams with fewer losses or more losses.
Yep. No, it's a great point. I also think that there's going to be a ton more chaos in the Big 12. The Big 12 isn't done chaosing. I think BYU could lose 1 or 2
Oklahoma
games.
State's done, but the rest of the Big 12 isn't.
Yeah, as of right now, I think the Big 12 title would be BYU versus Iowa State. Is that right?
Yeah, and BYU, Iowa State, and Colorado control their. If they win out, they're in, but they don't play each other. So right now, it'd be Iowa State and BYU.
So Kansas State, from a tiebreaker standpoint, if they finish out and beat Colorado, would be above them. Yeah. Okay. So I was going to say, Kansas State plays Iowa State at the end. That's Iowa State's big hurdle.
Yeah. And then, if Kansas, and then, so I think there's going to be a lot more chaos. And then the thing to keep in mind, you mentioned SMU, they lost to BYU. So BYU staying undefeated, winning the Big 12, that helps SMU a ton. If BYU drops out, doesn't win the Big 12, then that loss becomes worse optically. So if you're an SMU fan, as Collin is, you're also a BYU fan going forward. Just like Notre Dame's loss to NIU, if they end up with 2 losses, that loss hasn't aged well. NIU has been unlucky, and we'll talk about them in a minute. But they have 4 or 5 losses, so that's just, it's not like NIU ended up being a top 25 team, which would have helped the Irish in the event that they do lose another game. But much more to talk about with the college football playoff rankings after they do come out. But always an interesting discussion. Before we get to some midweek action, baby, we have 2 games on Tuesday and 2 games on Wednesday. Bowling Green at Central Michigan. I can't figure out Central Michigan. They're getting bet against the year again. Just follow the steam on Central Michigan games. Bowling Green is a team I want to keep buying on. I think they're the best team in the MAC, and they're now healthy. I would lean Bowling Green, but that line is starting to get up there. Central Michigan down to their 3rd string quarterback. I don't know when. Have you heard anything on Bert Emmanuel? Is he out for the year? He got carted off, right?
Yeah, he got carted off, but I haven't heard.
Yeah, and they're already down their starter. So they got this Jefferson kid. Central Michigan has they give up too many explosive plays on defense. They can run the ball a bit, but their quarterback play now is just really bad. And their games are weird. They did just get blown up by Miami of Ohio. Is the bottom just falling out on this team? But all their other games, their 4 previous games are all decided by 1 to 2 points in these huge wild swings in their games. With weird line movement. I don't know what's going on in Mount Pleasant, but I'm not one to run to bet their games based on what I've seen.
I like the under, though. I mean, you mentioned the amount of quarterbacks there for Central Michigan, but also there's some major havoc allowed issues going on with Bowling Green's offense, and that is something that Central Michigan can take advantage of. So I look for both offenses to really have some problem getting some points up on the board.
Yeah, it could be a lot of negative play. Central Michigan can get some tackles for loss. Bazelak takes too many sacks. So there could be a lot of negative plays that put the offenses behind the sticks. Miami of Ohio at Ball State. Ball State is a team, their D is really bad. So they have some pass rushers. That's about it. They don't do anything else well. You have to get to Gabbert. He has the lowest adjusted completion percentage when under pressure in all of college football this year. But he's not under pressure a ton. The offensive line is pretty good. They can run their run offense has come alive of late. They got a good offensive line. They got the right guy at center now. So they should be able to move the ball on Ball State. And Ball State's offense has been decent. Simone's is a brand new offense. The offensive line's been really good. They got this kid Sloan from EKU at running back who's played well. They lost their left tackle for the season, but the kid who came in has actually been an upgrade, and he's coming off his 2 best games. The wide receivers are okay. They have Koziel at tight end, who's one of the best tight ends at the group of 5 level. And this Miami Ohio defense is solid. They're not going to give away explosives. They have really good linebackers, really good safeties. Ugu at 1 DN spot leads the country in pressures, but they don't really have another edge. Their second corner spot is a major question mark. They're playing more 3 linebacker sets after some losses last year. So they're a little bit more vulnerable through the air, and they don't have a second corner. Strider, I forget his name. Brown, he was a freshman last year. He's flashed. He's supposed to step up, be the number 1 guy without McKee. He has, but the other corner spot is a major question mark. They just lost their starter for the year. He was a redshirt freshman. He's out for the year with an injury. You have someone in there now that is not very good. So can Ball State take advantage through the air? Because Miami Ohio's going to score. Can Ball State keep up? They've generally been able to. Their games are pretty wild. I got to dig more into that. Initial lean would be Ball State at home, but the D is bad. No stops.
I took the under in this game. It's a game that I projected 44, but I will say this. I am not going to live bet Bowling Green, Central Michigan under. I am going to live bet this game. The biggest reason is because Ball State can apply some pass rush. Explosives are where they can score points and get into this game, because Miami's defense has been stellar inside the extended red zone. They are 18th in defensive finishing drive. So I don't see Ball State creating methodicals in scoring. I see quick scores happening from both sides. So if you get a lull in the action, and right now 48.5, 48 is pretty key. If you get a lull in the action and you can get around 44 or down to 41 and get on the over, that's how I'm going to play this under I've already put in. because there will be explosive plays here.
Ohio, Kent State on Wednesday. I'm afraid that I haven't plugged this in yet. I'm afraid I'm going to have to bet Kent State. This line is probably, I mean, Ohio's been much better than expected. But laying 18.5 on the road here, they can run the ball. They can't really throw it. But Kent State is bad. I mean, they can hit explosives in the passing game. That's about it. They have 2 good receivers, but their offensive line is really bad. They're down to their 3rd string quarterback, although it's not a huge drop off between 1, 2, and 3 there. He's under pressure constantly. He's one of 2 quarterbacks in the country that's under pressure on 50% or more of his snaps. The other is Ethan Crawford at Southern Miss. Their offensive line is so bad they can't run it. They're averaging 2.4 yards per carry. So everything is just like, how many explosives can you hit? They're also just like always a backdoor candidate when they're getting these big numbers because they've done it a couple times this year. But their D is bad. Their offensive line is bad. It's just chuck it up and try to hit explosives in the passing game if you have enough time. Colin, what are your thoughts there? Well, I'll look up.
Yeah, I mean, I took the under 53 on this. It's still at 52. I would suggest
you're having no fun this week. You're just taking every action under. This is the most American thing I've ever seen in my life.
I'm going to get to the side. I know I jumped on these unders fast, but really I jumped on this one. 50% precip, 10 mile per hour winds. That's going to have an effect, but you can still have explosive plays in that. But the problem is,
that'll hurt Kent State more because they can't. If there's any weather, because they literally can't run it. They just have to hit explosives downfield in the pass game, which are much more difficult, obviously, in conditions.
Kent is dead last in creating a quality drive. Like, I want to bet Kent Stuck. I think the number is a little bit too inflated. I think I'm a little around 2 touchdowns. I think the numbers, but how do you make, God, I feel like we do this all the time with these Kennesaw States and everything else. Like, how do you make an assumption that Kent's going to get points up on the board here when they're dead last in creating a methodical drive? So I think the number is a little bit too far. I just don't know if I'm going to get in front of it.
Let's see where I make it. Ohio. 5.
Definitely some weather there. So
Kent. There's like almost no home field. Yeah, I mean, like I'm like at 15. Got to look at the weather. Kent in conditions is a very bad proposition. Number leans Kent State though. Last game. This is the game I like the most. Northern Illinois. I've been waiting for this spot. I mean, Northern Illinois, they're now healthy. They've dealt with some injuries on offense. I think they had this extended hangover after that Notre Dame game, but they've also been extremely unlucky. Their 4 losses are all by 1 possession. They outplayed NC State at NC State. Should have won that game. They lost on a 50-something yard field goal last week against Ball State as time expired. They lost to Toledo when they had their backup quarterback, and they still put up 400 yards. They just went 2 of 8 on 4th down, and they lost 13-6 in that game. They've been right there. I think this is the best defense in the MAC, and they're going up against the best offense in the MAC in Western Michigan, for my money. So I think they can do enough to slow this Western Michigan team down. Western Michigan also has played nobody in league play. I mean, clowns. So they're the only undefeated team in the MAC. Part of that is their offense. Yes, their offense has been really good. They can run it. They can throw it. They can do it all. But part of that has been who they've played. And they've played nobody in league play. So I think they're in for a bit of a rude awakening here against the Northern Illinois defense, which is really good, has really no weaknesses, is really healthy. And, this is a Western Michigan offense that's played Kent State, Buffalo, even Akron, and Ball State. And it's not like they were slam dunk wins. They beat Akron by 10, but they gave up 500 yards. They beat Ball State by 3. They beat Buffalo by 7, 48-41, 45-42. What are you hearing here? Their D is terrible. They have one decent corner. They got a decent edge player in Carter, but they lost everybody. I thought they were going to they brought in some guys that I thought were going to be difference makers up front, and they just haven't been. The linebacker play is bad. The safety play is bad. This defense is really bad. And I think Northern Illinois will have enough juice offensively to score. Anyone can score on this team. And then I think the Northern Illinois defense is very, very good and will get enough stops. I like Northern Illinois to get it done on the road. Colin, do you agree?
I might jump in with you, but I make it a pick, and I put the total of 52. So I was sidelined on this one. So I'm might join you. I definitely don't want to ice you on the opening of Maction weekend, Mac midweek. So, but let's go.
Brett, any thoughts on Mac games that you're looking at Tuesday or Wednesday?
I kind of like Miami, Ohio a little bit. Ball State, you mentioned their defense, worst in the country. I think they're falsely inflated because they played Vandy close in a horrible spot. So I like Miami, Ohio in that spot, going against you maybe.
Mr. Chuck Martin, Matt Mitchell, my producer, big fan of Matt Mitchell. We'll be happy to hear that. All right, that'll do it for today's episode. Tomorrow, Group of 5 guys, Mike and Mike, return. Make sure you check them out. They always do a great job. And Collin and I will be back with the entire Week 11 college football betting preview, which will be out now, new time, early, Thursday by 8 p.m. Eastern. And then Brett will be back as well for the live show, 10:30 a.m. Eastern, each and every Saturday. It's time for us to go find some winners and dive into this card. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe, unsubscribe, subscribe, tell a friend, tell an enemy. You know the drill. We'll catch y'all later in the week. Cheers.